The United States of America, the land of the free. Or at least that's a mythology that modern media and popular culture would have us believe. According to them, the USA is the greatest and freest place on earth. But what does their freedom mean? To whom is granted the right to be free? And are Americans free to criticize their own country where they see inequality and injustice? You see, freedom cannot exist in an environment when one is not free to criticize. Hello everyone, I'm Tom Lonsdale, and I'd like to thank you all today for letting me speak at the United Nations Youth Forum. I'm hoping that after you hear my speech today, we can all strive to make a change tomorrow. America's National Basketball Association has allowed their players to protest racial injustice and police brutality towards African Americans by kneeling during the national anthem. The NBA's open and progressive views on player protests have angered many Americans who see the protest as unpatriotic. According to the angry citizens, including their own president, the players have no right to criticize the government's lack of action for social change, even though the criticism itself falls under the free speech they are so proud and protective of. As both a basketball player and fan, it deeply worries and angers me that these patriotic Americans are not even willing to have a conversation about their own country's flaws, especially in a time where America is so clearly flawed. It seems that their unquestioning faith in the greatness of their country blinds them to its shortcomings, even in the face of incontrovertible evidence of inequality and a lack of freedom. This blind faith at times causes people to behave appallingly. These issues are explored in Arthur Miller's 1953 play The Crucible, Miller's allegory for the anti-Soviet McCarthyism movement that was taking place at the time. Miller links McCarthyism to the Salem witch trials of the 1690s. It is quite frankly worrying and disturbing that the terrible inequality that Miller wrote about still frequently raises its ugly head today. However, if we, the youth of today and the adults of tomorrow, want to have any fighting chance of making a meaningful change, we need to have a conversation. John Williams from the New Republic published his article titled "The NBA is White Conservatives' Favorite New Target for Racial Dog Whistling" in August of 2020. In his article, he discusses the backlash that the NBA players received for kneeling during the national anthem and how powerful political forces like the Republican Party are using it against them. Williams says that had it not been for COVID-19, Republicans would typically rely on their ability to pump out a steady stream of culture red meat by reacting sanctimoniously to the outspoken liberalism of celebrities. Williams uses this interesting metaphor to help portray the Republican Party as smug sensationalists. Like all of us, the Republican Party is living in a barren cultural landscape with COVID-19 preventing us from living our normal lives. So the source for their once integral strategy of sparking outrage among supporters is running low. Due to such a cultural desert, there aren't as many targets for the party to aim at. And the NBA's restart was described by Williams as a suddenly convenient catch-all target. Our duty as the youth of today is to both identify and expose this scapegoating when we see it, because unfortunately, there is a growing culture of adults who are all too willing to use scapegoats like athletes kneeling during a national anthem to distract us from the truth. One can make an interesting connection to Arthur Miller's The Crucible. In the play, the slave character of Tituba is essentially in the NBA's position of being an easy target, although unlike the NBA, Tituba had no means of defending herself. In Salem, Tituba was a clear scapegoat for the villagers to blame, as she was a foreigner who spoke little English. Deep down, her attackers in Salem knew that Tituba was, like Williams says, a suddenly convenient catch-all target. But still, the powerful influences of Salem were able to shift the blame to her, as she was clearly the easiest target. Obviously, there is no scenario in which the recent protests do not spark any outrage or conversation, but this is what the NBA and its players wanted, a conversation. Ironically, the outrage over the protest is inadvertently helping the players put their message across. However, the outrage itself shines a light on the crucial issue of inequality that not only plagues America, but the whole world. Whether it be Salem in the 1690s, or Miller's America of the 1950s, or Trump's America of today, inequality remains a blight on society. The recent NBA protests have also shown the world how defensive people can be when their country is subjected to even the slightest criticism. The actual content of the protest was rather moderate in comparison to some of the other activism utilized by other progressive Americans. The NBA players simply knelt during the anthem and were allowed to choose a social justice tagline to display on the back of their jerseys, including "Black Lives Matter, How Many More, and Vote." Williams writes that most of the jersey messages are so bland and unspecific that it seems wrong to even call them political. Whilst we can all agree that it is good to see the NBA to allow its players to create change in today's society, it is troubling to see how little protest it takes to anger those opposed to the message. Ironically, the people so protective of their free speech are the same ones who are trying to oppress and silence those who don't agree with them. The underlying root of such blatant hypocrisy is not only in America's society, but societies worldwide, can be partly attributed to something called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is described as the tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. Confirmation bias could also be described as blind faith. It recognizes only one side of an argument, it resists evidence, it stops us from asking questions, and prevents us from examining issues. It leaves us with no intellectual power, but only the ability to react emotionally. And there is no clearer example of this than the hysterically negative response to the NBA's protest. The Crucible alludes to this when Reverend Parris cynically exploits people's faith in the church and their fears of witchcraft to condemn Tituba and to shift the blame away from his daughter and from himself. He says to his daughter Abigail, "If you traffic with the spirits in the forest, I must know it now, for surely my enemies will, and they will ruin me for it." Quickly after, he says, "And I heard screeching and gibberish coming from her mouth. She was swaying like a dumb beast over the fire." In the first few minutes of the play, Parris is established by Miller as a greedy zealot who only cares for his church and not the well-being of others. In the case of the NBA's critics, they are only willing to listen to the rhetoric that praises their country, and they refuse to be open to different perspectives that can shed a much-needed light on America's issues. They elevate the importance of singing a song over the right of African Americans to be treated equally by those in power. We can all come together to stop this disgusting hypocrisy by reinforcing the facts and defending everyone's right to protest, even if you don't agree with them, and their right to be equal. Issues like inequality, particularly when it comes to one's race, have always been a problem throughout our history. Arthur Miller's 1953 play The Crucible was his allegory for the anti-Soviet McCarthyism movement that was taking place at the time. The play is a dramatized retelling of the Salem witch trials of the 1690s. The audience follows a slew of different members of Salem, a town whose residents are fearful that they are under attack by the devil. Miller prompts the audience to ask themselves questions, with the most prominent being, is the witchcraft real? Were the allegations false? And was the accused treated fairly or unequally? Miller's vessel to depict the inequality in Salem is Tituba, a female slave from Barbados, who was accused of witchcraft. Although admitting to witchcraft later on, Tituba is the initial target of the townsfolk. Even her admission of guilt is still questioned by the audience. Did Tituba actually commit witchcraft, or was she forced into confessing for crimes that didn't even exist? Tituba was an easy target for the accusers, as she was foreign, black, and not skilled in English. As an outsider, the townsfolk found it all too easy to believe in her guilt, given that nobody from such a faithful town could commit such evil, could they? Another example of the town's confirmation bias is the fact that they all immediately jump to the conclusion of witchcraft without considering any better, more logical occurrences. The people of Salem were not willing to look beyond their own religion and question their beliefs, as they, like most people both then and now, quite frankly only wanted their beliefs reaffirmed. Arthur Miller's The Crucible helps prove that issues like inequality were not only issues in the 1690s, but also in modern times, and it shows no signs of slowing down. So now, it's time for us, the youth, to start slowing it down. Overall, inequality has been a problem in not only America, but the whole world. This has been made no clearer than with the backlash and criticism received by the NBA after allowing their players to show protests against racial inequality. Ironically, those who are criticizing these players the most are the same ones who are so desperate to protect their free speech, even though the protests they are criticizing showcase an expression of their so desired free speech. So, what's next? What can we do to at least begin to destroy inequality? I have one simple answer. Have a conversation. If someone opposes you, have a conversation with them. Ask them why they think the way they do. If we all just stopped and understood where others came from, it would at least help in understanding the way that they think. Even if after your conversation with that person you still feel strongly about your own perspective, that's fine. At least you now somewhat understand the other person, no matter how wrong or immoral you see them to be. Once again, I'd like to thank the United Nations Youth Forum for allowing me to speak today. Together, we can all unite to destroy inequality. Let's start the conversation.